All right. So I am live now. I'm just gonna go see if I can put this. Where's the best place to put this thing? All right. There we go. All right. Okay. All right. We're gonna get started with tonight's class. Now let me just hit record for you guys. We're just gonna mute you guys, and then if you have questions, you can unmute or you can type in the chat.
Recording in progress.
All right, so tonight's class will be recorded and we will be live on YouTube tonight. The whole goal is going live a little bit on YouTube. It's just to get people, whether it be your friends or family members, get more people interested in the stock market, but really to just make it like plain and simple and clear so that people understand it and they don't feel like intimidated by the stock market. Freedom University is an online investment club where our goal is to obtain freedom. And we're learning different principles and strategies and things that can help us to get there. So the stock market is one major part of what a lot of wealthy people use to build wealth, to gain their freedom. And so we do focus a lot of our attention on the stock market. We have our investing class that teaches you about the stock market. And then these classes, the investing course that we have, where you go over the information to learn about the stock market, the foundations. And then we do these classes twice a month for investors to get more detailed information about the stock market. So it's always important to finish the course content because that gives you like the baseline foundational information. And then we take these classes to kind of like add on to it and get additional information. So tonight is our investing class, and we are going to be going over some information about the stock market. Now, tonight, what I want to do is I want to talk a little bit about, and I don't know if we've talked about this, but I don't think we've spent a lot of time going into the details of it. So we're going to go into the details of like the process of what people see from the time that they see, a company is a publicly traded company, to like what you're seeing on CNBC. And I just want to go over some basic information and make sure that people understand it. Okay. So let's start with from the time a company is built, right? A lot of people know that they start companies, they form LLCs, and they have corporations. But if you just think about driving into your shopping center that you might go shopping in, and you see a lot of companies, but a lot of these companies are not necessarily publicly traded companies. So you can have a business, you can have a company. It does not mean that it's a publicly traded company. So in order to be a publicly traded company, you have to do something, and you have to register to be a publicly traded company. Now, there are two major stock exchanges that you can register your business to become a publicly traded company. Now, once you do this, you must know that you are basically deciding that you want to open your books up. So they better be good, right? Because you have to, once you register, you have to basically open your books up to the world. And you have to tell everybody about everything that's going on in your company. Are you profiting? Are you losing? Who are you paying? How much debt do you have? How much cash do you have? All of this stuff is now public knowledge. Example, publicly traded company, right? Now, the benefit to doing this, obviously, being on the stock exchange, you can get people to buy into your business. You can use that money to then further and advance your business, right? So that would be the whole purpose of doing it. Now, when it comes to the two major stock exchanges, let's talk about the two major ones. Well, they are based in New York City. Yes, we have any New Yorkers out there? Anybody in New York out there? Okay, well, if not, that's where the two major stock exchanges, where they are based. Now, even companies that are in, think of like an Alibaba that, it's not here based in the US, it'll even put its company on one of these stock exchanges as well. And this could be them having their company on our stock exchange as well as maybe one in their country. And that is called a dual listing, meaning they're on more than one stock exchange. So let's talk about these two major stock exchanges. The New York Stock Exchange is one, and the other one is the NASDAQ. So these are the two major stock exchanges, New York, and what's the other one? NASDAQ, right? All right. Okay, so now we have these two different stock exchanges, and as a company, you have to decide, well, which one are you going to register with? Now, some things to know about the two stock exchanges. The New York Stock Exchange is actually, they call it a bigger stock exchange, but it's only bigger because what it's basing how big it is the market capitalization of all the companies that are registered on the New York Stock Exchange. So the bigger stock exchange is the New York Stock Exchange, and how they base that is on basically how much the companies are worth. Market capitalization is how much each company is worth. And New York is the bigger of the two in reference to market capitalization. Now, however, in reference to how many companies are on the New York Stock Exchange, there are only 2,400. How many? 2,400. Okay. Now let's talk about the other major exchange that you would have to register for, which is the NASDAQ. So the NASDAQ is the second biggest stock exchange that is also based in New York. And I want to tell you what it stands for. So it has like this long name. So NASDAQ stands for, you might want to write this down, National Association of Securities Dealers, Automates, and Quotations. That's what NASDAQ stands for. Long name. They've broken it down to NASDAQ, right? Now, NASDAQ only has about 3,300 companies on the NASDAQ. Only 3,300. More than the New York, but still only 3,300. Now, typically, I'm always telling people there are about 4,000 companies on the stock exchange, but the truth is that there are two stock exchanges and there's a different amount on each one of them. Okay. Now, who do you think Apple, which is one of the largest companies in the world, who do you think they're registered with? Do you think they're registered with the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ Stock Exchange? Put it in the chat. Let me see. I'm going to put the chat up. Let's see if anyone's going to type quick or are they going to try to Google it. Which one is it? Are they with the New York or are they with the NASDAQ? I say that's New York. Okay. Both. Okay. Yep, they're actually with the NASDAQ. They're with the NASDAQ. Apple is with the NASDAQ. But guess what? Most of the big companies are actually with the NASDAQ, right? So they actually even have like Microsoft and Amazon as some of the companies that are on the NASDAQ as well. Now, let's talk about that for a second, okay? Because we talk about an ETF called the QQQ. Everybody knows about the QQQ, right? Okay, so the QQQ is basically the top 100 companies in the NASDAQ, okay? And most of the companies that are registered on the NASDAQ are technology-based companies. Well, a lot of the big tech companies are actually registered on the NASDAQ. And so QQQ is a representation of the top 100 of the NASDAQ, okay? So if you ever see CNBC and you're looking at the bottom and you see something at the bottom that says NASDAQ and it's showing you how the NASDAQ is doing, it's showing you how all of the companies in the NASDAQ. So why would it show you all the companies in the NASDAQ and not put at the bottom all of the companies in the New York Stock Exchange? The reason is because most of the big players, which are the big players in our economy, in the US economy, are technology-based companies. And most of those companies are actually on the NASDAQ. So whenever you see anything at the bottom and you see the NASDAQ, but you don't see the New York, the reason for that is because the major companies are actually registered with the NASDAQ. Make sense? Okay, they say if it makes sense, it makes money. Okay. Now, whenever you are on like CNBC and you see like the tickers at the bottom, right? You see those tickers and you see the three big indexes that we all follow. And we follow these indexes because it tells us how the market is performing. Now, for me, I would have thought that there were way more than whether it be 2,400 or 3,300. I thought it would have been way more than that many companies that are registered on within the major stock exchanges. But that's just about it. And you know there's way more companies than that in the United States, right? However, when we talk about on CNBC, they're always talking about, you know, the NASDAQ. The three big ones are the NASDAQ, the Dow, and the S&P 500. And you always see them at the bottom of the tickers at the bottom. So let me make sure I explain the indexes that they are following and why do they follow those three at the bottom. So the one that we talk about a lot in this course is called the S&P 500, right? We talk about that a lot, right? So the S&P 500, do you think those are New York Stock Exchange companies or do you think those are NASDAQ? Which one do you think they are? Can anybody guess? Guess in the bottom. It's okay to guess. Denise says New York, New York. Judy says NASDAQ. Okay, so the S&P 500 is a combination of both. They're both. So the S&P 500 has the NASDAQ and companies from the New York Stock Exchange in it. And the S&P 500 is the top 500 of basically all the companies. Okay, so it has a combination of companies registered on both different exchanges, but it's just the top 500 of all the companies that are registered. Okay, so you always see at the bottom, and the S&P 500 is probably the most broad index. Why is it the most broad? It's the most broad because it's not picking mainly from technology. It's not picking from like who are you registered with. It's broad because it's just picking from the top best of all the companies. So it's broad where you're getting a mixture of companies that are in different sectors. So that's why they call it, out of all the indexes, they call it a broad index. That's what that means. Broad means not focusing on a specific like sector, but meaning broad, meaning it has a little bit of everything. Okay, so that's the S&P 500. Then we have like the NASDAQ that you see at the bottom. And when you see the NASDAQ at the bottom, it's not really following like the top 100 of the NASDAQ or anything like that. It's just following all the companies in the NASDAQ. But because the NASDAQ has a lot of technology companies, it's using that as an index because those are the major companies in our economy that really move the market. Make sense? Okay. Now here's the third one. The third one is the Dow Jones, honey. Now let me tell you about the Dow Jones, okay? All right, so the Dow Jones started like a long time ago by these three guys. One guy was named Charles Dow, and then the other guy was Edward Jones. So that's how they got the name Dow Jones. It was two people. And you hear all the time, and if you've seen things on Instagram, and they're like, okay, what's McDonald's? What's Burger King? These are all people's like last names. And most major companies are like from someone's last name. And you've seen that post, right? And the guy's like, well, you know, what's your last name? What's going to come from you, right? Okay, well, the Dow Jones comes from two people's names, the people who created it. But how about this? So these guys back in the day, it was actually three. So it was Charles Dow, Edward Jones, and another guy named Charles. And he got a long last name, but it don't have nothing to do with the name. It's just really long. Burger Stresser or something like that. I don't even know how to pronounce it. But these are the three guys that created the Dow Jones. Now, how about this? The way the Dow Jones was created was, I think it was like in the 1800s. These guys were first putting out information like in news publications about the market. So about all these different companies, they're putting it out in the market. And this is how like the Dow Jones their company gets created, it gets created by putting out information about the stock market. Okay. Now, if you look at them, they actually, as time went on, obviously new people own the company, but as they kept their legacy and kind of what they built moving forward, would you believe, okay, so I don't even want to get to the Dow Jones just yet. I want you to understand or know that their legacy was passed down so long that this company that they started owns the Wall Street Journal. Y'all know who that is, right? They own the Wall Street Journal. They own Barron. Do you know who Barron is? Barron is a huge news publication about the stock market. And they also own MarketWatch. How many of you know who MarketWatch is? MarketWatch is another big one. All three major news publications that are owned by the same company that put out the same type of information just about the stock market. And if you go to any of them, you could get like a subscription from them. I'm like, man, they're raking in the money, just giving out the same information, just three different company names. And really, but it's all the same thing. So you're all just getting information about the market, and they own all three companies and some other companies as well. And so they've continued that legacy, but they also own like another company that created the Dow Jones, and they partnered with an owner of the S&P 500 to create the Dow Jones. So the Dow Jones is just the top 30 companies that they have picked, and they can change, and they can change from time to time. It's not really based on like the NASDAQ. It's just based on what they call is the best companies that are out there. And I'm just going to name a few of them so that you know what some of them are. Some that you might be familiar with, like Johnson & Johnson and Chevron is on the list. Obviously, Apple is on the list. But even companies that I don't know if I would have thought would have been on the Dow Jones, like Nike is on the Dow Jones. This is the top 30 who they say are the best companies in the world. So you have United Health, Goldman Sachs, Home Depot, Microsoft, McDonald's, Visa. You have Johnson & Johnson, Chevron, Salesforce, American Express, Walmart, Procter & Gamble, Boeing, 3M, JP Morgan & Chase, Walt Disney, Merck, Nike, Coca-Cola, Cisco, Verizon, Walgreens, Intel. You know, these are the top 30 companies that they say are the best of the best. So whenever you see the Dow Jones at the bottom of CNBC and you see them and you say they have it down there, the Dow, these are just 30 of the best companies that they pick from. And this is the same company that puts out the news publications, but this is also the same company that does the research on the stock market. And they say that these are the top 30 companies that you should really be paying attention to because they're the best of the best. So whenever you are watching CNBC and you see down the bottom NASDAQ, one of the things you're going to know is that NASDAQ can mean more than one thing. NASDAQ is one of the top exchanges, the number 2 in the world, but also, you know, it's just a representation of all the companies that are registered on the NASDAQ. And because these companies are mainly technology companies, it's the reason why it gets so much, it gets more, people look at it more than people look at them just having at the bottom the New York Stock Exchange. Okay. So I wanted to just break these things down because we talk a lot about stocks, we talk a lot about investing, but sometimes we don't have the foundational information of like where it starts, where does it come from, what am I looking at, what is the S&P 500, why do I see the Dow Jones, what is that? If I see the NASDAQ, well, what is that? Oh, if I have QQQ, what do I have? So if you have QQQ, you have the top 100 companies that are in the NASDAQ is what the QQQ is. So it's important to have the behind the scenes information about what you're looking at, what you're investing in, and not just, okay, here's the S&P 500, here's the top 500, but where did these companies come from? Where are they registered? And so I wanted to go through that information today and share that with you guys as well as YouTube. And so I'm going to stop our YouTube for a second. I'm going to answer your questions.